And we are live. Hello, Joel.
Hello, Augustine.
How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you. It's Friday, and I'm very much looking forward to a nice breather now that the weekend is here.
Yeah, I agree. I feel exactly the same. And I was looking forward to our call because um, you're sort of like what we call in French l'enfant terrible. Um, in in our field, you're a little bit of a troublemaker. So I think it's going to be an interesting talk. And uh, and so
But
we're
you got
going
to
to go
give me that
all
word
in.
again, though. Fontanible?
Enfant terrible,
Enfantanible.
which yeah, which means like the
A
terrible kid.
child. Yeah, yeah.
But
Okay.
it's not negative. It's that means that you can bring controversy. Like you polarize. Um,
Yes.
and I'm not saying this at all in a bad way. I'm just saying you're an interesting character, so that's why I invited you to come in. Um,
I love
so
it.
my first question and I asked the same question to everybody coming in as a guest is who is Joel Pilger? And don't tell
Mm.
me what you do because that's going to be displayed in the titles here on screen. So I'm asking who is Joel Pilger, the person behind the persona.
He's a boy on a bit of an adventure, I'd say. And he's a creative at heart. But he's always had this ambition to to do bigger or crazier or more, I don't know, unexpected things with his life. And he keeps daring himself to try things. And usually it works out. So I keep going. I'm also an eternal optimist. I think there is, yeah, there's a lot of fun and joy and strangeness and mystery in this journey that I'm on. So I don't know if that's answering your question in a too roundabout weird way, but that's my start.
No, no, weird is good. Weird is good.
Good.
So I will retain two interesting things of what you just said is first of all, you define yourself as a boy. You could have said like a man or whatever, but you said a boy. So that to me conveys like a certain youth inside of your head.
Sure.
Um, and I think it directly connects with what you said after. Is like you like to try different things and go into an adventure, which is which is very characteristic of boys and girls youth. Um, so that's interesting. And you also said that all those adventures you go in often like happen. Like they realize. Um, so why would you say those things happen? Like there's a certain factor of luck, like in everything in life, but then there's a whole other part.
Well, I'm rather fond of the definition of luck that you hear out there. It might be Yogi Berra who first said that luck is simply where preparation and opportunity meet or intersect. I forget how the quote goes, but I think what I find is that that reality is this certain thing that has actually been created by others before us, and we get to participate in that same act of creation. So what's strange is if we imagine something, we can cause it to come into being. And so this is why we do things what we call like setting goals and right and having ideas and visions and so forth. But there's something really quite beautiful and mystical about the fact that if we imagine something, if we dream it, I'm sounding like Walt Disney now, that it it will tend to come into being. It will be created. It's again very mysterious, and we can unpack it. But I think it's something that I find to be more and more true the older I get and the more living I experience.
Okay, don't worry, we will get to unpack a lot of things, I think. Um, so each time I choose a topic for a guest, it's tailor made. So it's not that I have a list of guests and then I have a list of topics and I just pick randomly. So so the one I picked for you, you will soon understand why. And so the theme is I call it the underbelly, the mystifying art in our industry. Um, and that's because, like, I picked that one for you because you're a creative, but you're also very business minded.
Mm-hmm.
You, and I'm going to say this with, like, again, no negative connotation. You're an excellent salesman,
Mm-hmm.
and that's something I immediately felt when I met you. Briefly at Camp Mograph, and then when we met in London for the Fuse event.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you convey that uh, it's like you you're constantly pitching, you know.
Probably so. Yeah, probably so.
And again, I'm saying this is not good or bad. It's just a way of, like, each one of us is. Um, and so you're always in this kind of, like, high energy level when you're communicating something. It communicates
Right.
passion in a way. Um, so you've owned a studio before, if I'm correct.
Yes.
Um, when did you decide that you wanted to go the studio route? And then I have,
Mm.
like, a secondary question connected to that.
So I was trained classically as an industrial designer. And while I was at Georgia Tech, I remember reading a book about a guy in London who started an industrial design practice. And I thought that was so interesting. He had an office, and here's what he charged his clients, and this is how he got work. And it put a dream inside of me, plus my dad and my mom put crazy dreams into me as well. I spent a few years working as an industrial designer, then as an animator, doing freelance work. And then I just one day said, I think I'm going to invest. I want to, like, buy a really expensive computer and expensive software, which took a lot of money in those days, and see if I can make a go of this. Was it as a freelancer? Not really, because freelancers didn't exist in those days, strangely. So I said, well, I'll start a company. Maybe it's a company of one. But I thought, sure, someday it would be cool if I had 3 or 4 other animators working with me. So this was 1994 when I started this company, Impossible Pictures. And I mean, that's the quick story. I'm not sure if I'm, were you asking me why or just when did I start that?
No, I'm going to connect it with now the secondary question related to this, and is, what was that attracted you to that option? Was it the creative path, or was it, like, the business path? And again, there's no
Well,
bad or wrong answers here. I'm not
no, I
gonna
love
I'm
that.
not, I'm not gonna say, like, oh, you're perverting the creativity because you were business minded. Not at all. It's just like both are, like, to me, totally acceptable and viable.
Yeah. It's really, really good question, Augustine. I would say it was definitely a combination of both, but I think I look back now, and if I'm honest, it was 51% business and 49% creative. And I say that because I was a kid who was extremely fortunate to have a best friend across the street, Mike. And we're still friends to this day. And we did all sorts of crazy entrepreneurial things. We made a movie and opened a theater and charged admission for the kids that were in the movie to come see themselves in the movie. We had a candy store. We did the annual haunted house every year. We did all these crazy things. But for us, it was fun to make and to create as creatives. But it was even a little bit more fun to do it as a business because there was something exciting about if some kid will pay me 7 cents to come watch this movie, that means something. It's different than just you're making something and you make it for yourself. And also, let's be honest, I recognized, hey, if I could start this business and make a good living doing that, maybe make a really good living and make a really good income, that leads to freedom and independence. And I get to do what I want. And that is such a core part of me, and I think many creatives as well, is that we have this. I'll just be honest. I have always been the type of boy and now man who you cannot make me do something I don't want to do. I call it undisciplined, call it immature if you want, but I just call it, I'm going to always follow the path that excites me and that I want. And until somebody says I can't do it, I'm going to keep going. And business is simply a means to that end, if that makes sense.
It does. And I think you understand better now why I chose the topic for you.
Yeah, it's great. It's great.
And I call it the underbelly because, the underbelly is that section that is like sensitive, that we often hide. And
Mm-hmm.
and in the industry in which we operate, which is creativity, be it like motion design, be it being film commercials, whatever it is. Of course, like people that are business owners have a different point of view and they're way more like uh, awakened to this conversation. But like the business part of the conversation is always considered a little bit dirty, if you
Mm-hmm.
want.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's not something we put forward.
Right.
I mean, I wouldn't include myself, but like majorly.
Sure.
But we are service providers in a way, and let's not stay in the past, and now let's move to the present. So now you don't own a studio anymore, and now you have, and again, feel free to correct me if I don't put it into the proper words. You have sort of like a consultant role, sort of, which is oriented towards studios majorly, I think, and is all about making business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
And
would call
so,
it an advisor, right? Like an advisor
yeah,
to founders, right? As a former founder, advisor to founders. But yes, very much so. Continue.
and so when that jump happened, and why you were motivated to do that jump, because you could have kept going with the studio, what made you like evolve to that new form?
Mm. It was boredom. It was a good friend who was a rival of mine, a friend named Ryan, who ran a studio in Denver called Spilled, which is still going to this day. And we were having lunch one day, and I was in year 19, I think, of running my business. And I was twitchy. I was itching to do something. Like, we should merge our companies and we should go do this together and all this. And he, again, I was pitching, to use that word. And he said, Joel, I don't get it. I just think that you have accomplished everything that you set out to do. And now you don't know what to do next. And I realized, holy shit, he's absolutely right. And shortly after that, I had an opportunity from a client who wanted to acquire what was left of my studio. And I said, this is a good time to close this chapter because I need to do something different. I have to do something different. And this sounds interesting. I'll go work for these guys and help them launch this new venture and so forth. That ended up being nothing. It went away. And within 6 months, I said, oh, wait a minute. What am I going to do? and I briefly considered getting back into cinematography, maybe joining IATSE and becoming an actual professional cinematographer in the union. I considered getting a job. I thought I could go be a creative director at a TV network or something, no problem. And the other path was I could help all the people out there that are trying to do what I just did. And wow, I really have a heart for these people, because a lot of these folks that I will call studio and production company founders, there were a bunch of them that were former employees of mine or freelancers that I worked with who had gone on to start their own businesses. And just like me, there's no roadmap, right? There's no book, there's no class that you take on how to do this. And what I knew was if people could understand the business side, okay, that underbelly, if they could really understand it a lot better, it will not only make them more successful, which we would call money and other things, but even more importantly, I think it's the thing that will enable them to achieve a whole nother level of satisfaction and fulfillment, and it will ultimately unleash their greatest creative gifts into the world, which is a whole, right? It's almost a whole nother thread we could go down right there. But this was ultimately why I chose to go in this direction. And it's been 10 years. I haven't looked back because I am still having so much fun and I'm not bored.
Yeah, I was gonna say like from what I could wrap around my head in the Fuse meeting like we had in London, it's like this got you to travel a lot, I think, meet a lot of different people from different backgrounds, from different countries. Um, what, how has this like, what mark has this left on you?
Mm.
Because you're teaching these people, um, I mean, not use this word teach. Let's say you've been helping these people with their business practices, but I guess you're also learning things from them as you go.
Big
And
time.
so it's like, it's like a bridge where it goes both ways.
Yep.
So, of course, you cannot share all of them because we only have an hour. But if you could like pinpoint a couple of those things that you have learned through the process, and maybe also humbled you, because sometimes
Oh
we
man.
show ourselves to like teach, and then we end up like getting so much more back too. So if you can share a little bit more on that.
Well, first of all, I think I am very humbled in that um, most all of the people that I work with, these business owners and partners and leaders and so forth, are generally so much more talented than I ever was. So, first of all, I'm humbled and I'm in awe of the creative work that they're producing. But some of the takeaways, I think it's very insightful of you to mention that every time I work with a new person, meet a new person, have some sort of an experience like the dinner that we shared in, that I have this insatiable curiosity because I'm always wondering what makes this person tick and why are the things they are doing, why are they working? Why are they not working? What are the patterns? Um, right? There's so many riddles that we are all trying to solve on this journey. And what I find is my curiosity has taken me to 40 or 50 countries. And I lost track of how many, people. It's in the hundreds or thousands by now. But it's the things that I've learned from them are, wow. I'm trying to think even where I might begin. One is that the journey never ends. And when I think of the kind of work and the kind of businesses that I was running now 10 more years ago, that the pace of growth and change and the quality of the work, it just keeps getting better and more varied and more interesting. It just doesn't stop. And that to me is crazy. And I think also
Okay.
I've become
Um,
much more
you said some.
like, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, no, sorry, I interrupted you.
No, it's all right. I think we may have had a glitch, but I think the other thing is this curiosity has led me to become much more open-minded and receptive and pluralistic, if that word makes sense, in just my views of there's no right, there's no wrong, there's all these different colors of this rainbow or spectrum of why people do what they do and how they do it and what the ways that they are running their business, living their life. And I don't know, it's just been extremely gratifying to find that we all have we're so different, but we have all these things in common of we want to lead meaningful lives. And so therefore we try and lead these meaningful careers in order to create that meaningful life. And then business is a thing that if we can learn it, it supports that. And this I've seen over and over and over again through all of these many experiences I've now had over this past decade.
I'm gonna bounce on a couple of things you mentioned now that resonated with me. Is you mentioned curiosity, and I always say, if I could learn everything about anything, if that was like physically possible, I would. Like,
Mm.
if tomorrow you talk to me about like open heart surgery, I will find that. I mean, I've never practiced anything related to, like surgery or whatever, but I'm gonna find it like fascinating. And you talked about that appetite. I'm gonna want to like know everything about it. Of course, I can't. So you have to pick your battles. Another thing you mentioned that I thought that was like really interesting is like being kind of like opening your mind to other things. And something I always say is also never judge, because first of all, we're all different. We all have different backgrounds, different lives, and artistically speaking or not, when somebody does something, there's so much other things connected to that you are not aware of. And to be aware of those things, or to understand why those things happened, you have to be open to first something different than what you're used to. And we discussed this with another guest I had, Erin Sorofsky. It's also like taking the time. It's patience. Um, but as you well said, like, we are in a society that is constantly changing, and it's changing faster and faster. And so since you are advising all these businesses that are in a field that is like changing at light speed now, from a technology standpoint, from a society, from like remote work, like the way a studio used to work has completely changed. How has that affected you and what you do with these people?
Well, first of all, props to Erin. She's a really smart lady, and I so appreciate her point of view. And it's been fun to get to know her over the past few years. And that curiosity, right, leads this insatiable appetite, it I guess it's a bit overwhelming in terms of how it affects me, because I often think, wow, I can't meet another 1,000 new people this year and keep up with everyone and meet with everyone and learn from everyone. But somehow it works. But it it is a bit like, at times, maybe like surfing. Like there's this incredible chaos and there's this force that if you don't ride the wave, if you don't stay on top of it, you worry that it will just dash you to pieces and throw you against the rocks, or drown you. But if you keep riding that wave, it's I don't know, there can also be a joy and a beauty that, despite all of this change and chaos that's happening around us, there are some timeless truths, right? Like you said, don't judge. And I thought, God, I love that, because that's a principle that many of us have said we embrace now for going back a little over 2,000 years at least, but few of us actually practice it. And I'm definitely like hell-bent on practicing that as much as possible, like you. And yeah, I think overall how it's affected me is that it's made me into I'll just say, a very, hopefully, I don't want to sound like I'm bragging, but I hope that I'm becoming the most non-judgmental person on the planet. And in the process, that I have something, some way to help anyone, that I can enter into their world, their space, their business, and somehow create something valuable. And it takes, it's taken 10 years of curiosity to be able to build up the confidence to, like when I went to Berlin before I saw you, I walked into a situation of 20 owners and I only knew 2 people. And here I am, I'm supposed to be the MC, right? I'm supposed to be the smart guy that's going to lead this experience and have this dinner with these founders. And I'm a bit terrified walking into that situation. But if I continue to be curious, authentic, and share my experience, share my intention, my heart, then something always magical happens, and I just keep going with it.
You know what they say, like, if you're afraid, that means you're alive.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah,
But
exactly. Welcome to the planet.
yeah, exactly. And I think, like, you mentioned like how to keep up with 100 more people if I meet 100 more people. And I think related to that is like, what's important is not like the length, it has to be meaningful. So there's people I connect very rarely because life, distance, many things. But when we do, even if that time is short, it's so intense. We make it count, and then we're refilled for like the next year where we don't see each other, we don't talk, maybe. But then when we talk again, it's like it was yesterday. Um, and um, and I, all of this is like really pretty and philosophical, and I'm gonna just like steer us into reality again, and connect this with the business side because that's what we were talking. And it's you said something that in the very opening of our call that I think is really important, is that the fact that business has worked for you, it has allowed you to do the things you wanted to do. Like, I'm going to call it wealth, but not as like being a millionaire. I'm just gonna call it wealth as like having funds to put your projects into motion. Um, and you know, I think that that's also like what a lot of people don't discuss in our field is like you want to open a studio that takes money, that because you need to rent a space, you need to have the facilities to meet clients, you need, if you want to hire people, you need to have the meetings to put your things into action. um, and so how do you, let me see, I'm trying to wrap my head about like how I want to ask this question is, to me this becomes, when you see it that way, that becomes purely functional. You demystify that part of the art industry or like the motion or film industry. It doesn't become that thing that needs to be hidden in a corner because you don't want to like stain your image as a creative. It becomes purely a meaning for an action that you wanna take. Can you then now develop on that?
Wow. Well, let's see, where would I begin? I would say this. I think wealth is an interesting word because if I was going to unpack it, I would say that business, meaning the business, running a studio, okay, even being a freelancer, being an independent artist, whatever that is. But the business side is the thing that can make you wealthy. And I might just define wealth for me personally as freedom, independence, okay, agency. That's just for me. But for me, I think if I can go where I want to go and do what I want to do, spend time with the people that I want to spend time with, that to me is wealth. And it's incredibly valuable. And by the way, I don't take it for granted because sure, I've worked hard for everything I have and where I am in life, but I also have had certain privileges and opportunities that many people don't have. So this is not something I take for granted. But yes, I think it's interesting. I've always been curious, Augustine, why the artists and the creatives don't want to talk about the business. They don't want to reveal this underbelly. And I feel like I may be at times the one person that keeps saying, I want to talk about it. I'm like, what artist doesn't want this wealth or this freedom? And I find that this view that says business or sales or money is unseemly, or it's the ugly underbelly, that it doesn't serve us well. I don't find that people who avoid this topic, that they are any happier or more fulfilled or any more wealthy than other people. It's quite the contrary. I think there's this opportunity for us to be really honest, really open, very vulnerable about all these things. This is part of what happens in these dinners, as you experienced in London. I just did one last night in Cincinnati here. And there's always more than a few people there that either during the evening or when the evening is done, that they remark, wow, it's like everyone finally dropped the filter and everyone was talking about the underbelly openly, candidly, without embarrassment or without shame. And like, okay, can we keep this conversation going? Because I think we need to talk about this stuff.
Yeah, I noticed like when I was in London with you, when we started like the simple question of asking, how has it been this year for you and the studio? And in the beginning, like people were like, "Oh, no, no," like kind of like hesitant into saying that maybe the year sucked for them, And I think there's no shame into saying it because, again, like yeah, you need to keep your image and you need to give that image to your clients that know that you're a rock and nothing is going to move you. Um, but the truth is, like clients also are living through the same things as we are. Um, and it's about like also very, very real. Um, and I think that's one of the reasons why I wanted you in this recording, because when I said polarizing, you can be polarizing for many reasons. I know I've been, because generally I kind of say out loud what nobody's saying, and
Right.
you can get crucified for it. But at some point, like you said, like somebody has to say it.
Yeah. I
Somebody
mean,
needs to
I'm
have
not
these
right.
conversations.
Yeah.
Otherwise, what?
I'm not on a journey to popularity. I'm not interested or motivated by numbers, likes, comments, that sort of thing. But that's just me personally, because I'm not judging others who are on that journey. So I think if it's my job to be the person that talks about the ugly underbelly of the business of creativity, then so be it. And there's a quote from Philippe Carvalho, if you know that title designer. He's
Yeah, I know
in
him very
Portugal.
well.
Okay, do you? That I loved when he shared this at the Digital Design Days conference, when he said, "Do work that is meaningful to you. Chances are it will be meaningful to others." And that's such a freeing thought, and it's stuck with me to this day, because I realize, just you do you, and the people who resonate with what you are about will support you. They will engage with you, right? You will collaborate with them. And so, again, I'm just continuing on this path. And until somebody says I can't do it anymore, I'm going to keep going.
And how, I know you've traveled a lot, you've met all these people, so I would interpret from that things are going well for you. Uh, but again, society and technology and everything is like evolving very, very fast. And are you feeling a shift yourself or for the people that you're advising with everything that's happening now? Have you felt a shift or something coming? And if you have, what is it?
Hmm.
I know it's a very complex question because there's many things happening right now in the world and many planes. So I'm not asking you like a detailed analysis, but more like a gut feeling.
Yeah, I'm thinking about some of the shifts that are maybe larger and more hidden, right? Because we could talk about something like AI, which in the last year or two, obviously, is causing a lot of transition and disruption. But if I was going to step back and take a larger view, one thing I've observed is this overall shift in the shift from having skills and exercising a craft to what today is, I think, what the world needs and what the market will pay for. And it's something I call expertise. It's more this idea of creating outputs and results, outcomes, right? Desired future states, these kinds of things. But when I think back to the 1990s, if you had skill, if you had a discipline in something like 3D animation, like I did, you were such a shiny object. You were this unicorn thing that, oh, Joel does 3D and he has that studio that does all that cool stuff. Wow. Okay. That was almost enough to drive your career, to fuel your life. And if I fast forward to today, those days are gone. They're just gone. And that's been an enormous transition, especially for the younger generation that is perhaps being taught the lessons of the past, which are learn a skill, right? Take on a craft, exercise that craft at a high ability, and the rest will work out. You will get a nice job and you will have a career. And that's increasingly not becoming true. And that's created all sorts of pressures for employees, for studios, for the businesses, the people out there. It's even creating pressures in the art world and the music world and all these other, tangential or adjacent industries. But again, that's just been one. Hopefully, that's helpful or constructive. One big observation of mine over the past 2 decades.
Okay. Today was released an episode which I recorded with PJ Richardson from
I
The
love
Laundry.
PJ. Yeah, he's amazing.
And something that, like I also tend to connect things I discuss with other guests, because that like nurtures me and then brings me other thoughts that I can share then with the next guest. And he has mentioned, he was vulnerable and he shared a couple of like struggles that being in this industry and challenges had on him, because for those who seek excellence, that doesn't come cheap. There's some trade-offs.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
And excellence has many faces and many different paths. And I believe that you two chase sort of that excellence in what you do. But the business side can be sometimes very brutal in that aspect, because art is like we put our emotions and our guts out and everything, but then the business is really sometimes, I would say, even like mathematical. Things add up or they don't. And so that has probably left you with some scars too. And I would like to hear a little bit more about those things, because all right now is expertise and all the good, and the world is beautiful and unicorns and rainbows, blah, blah, blah. Awesome. But I would like for the people that watches us, that this has to feel, I think, inspirational for sure, but it needs to be, again, real. And the reality is that business is sometimes very, very rough. So, yeah, could you elaborate on that a little bit?
I can think of a few. One that I'll immediately reference is the story of my studio. I ran Impossible Pictures for 20 years. And when I exited, people hear that word and they think, oh, wow, he got a big check and rode off into the sunset. Not at all. Not at all. In fact, when the dust finally settled, I was actually overwhelmed with an enormous amount of debt and taxes. And it was honestly about a 2-year chapter of my life that was grieving, because the story shifted, the narrative changed. It wasn't oh, I'm running this exciting business and all the things that I identified with. That was an enormously challenging process of grief to go through. And I think something else that I thought about when you were asking me the question was, I live little bit, if I'm honest, with a perpetual chip on my shoulder, because I've lived this life in business, and I've seen when people have betrayed, whether it's me or people that I care about. I see business deals gone sideways. I'm thinking of all the times that clients, let's say, weren't treating me or my business in a way with integrity, right? There's money at stake. There's all these kinds of things. And, right, pitching and not having the full story, and people playing favorites and all these sorts of things. And that chip on my shoulder shows up sometimes in how I have a very short fuse when I see someone that I care about, right? So this might be a studio owner that I'm working with. And I will often, behind closed doors, like call out clients on their shit so fast, because I am still a little bit bitter about all the times that I was mistreated. And it's like, I'll be damned if I'm going to, like, I got taken advantage of, or maybe I got abused back in the day. Now, fast forward to today, and if I'm working with you and we're trying to negotiate some deal, and I see someone trying to take advantage or abuse you, manipulate you, what have you, I can become extremely indignant, and sometimes even petty, because it might be a matter of principle. Okay. It might be $10. It might be $1. It might be so trivial, but because as a matter of principle, I know this to be true and this to be right and this to be honorable, I can get very bent out of shape and very, very uh, emotional and hot. And I have to like not let my wound about that maybe infect others. And then I think I would add a third thing, and that is, many people don't know that at the beginning of this year, I went through a transition where I lost about 9 years of my work and had to, in most respects, start over.
Yeah,
So it's
you
not some,
mentioned that in London.
yeah. It's again, it's all stuff that's sort of behind the scenes. But this year for me was like starting over, and almost like Taylor Swift having to recreate the masters. I had to sort of go back into the recording studio and start from scratch and say, okay, I've got to build a community. I need to reset and reconnect with all of my people, my fans, my clients, what have you, start a new podcast. I mean, just, and this was part of the reason I traveled so much this year, was I was really determined to spend time with people face to face and connect and reconnect. And that almost killed me. I mean, earlier this year, I think the first half of 24 was the first time in a decade that I really almost hit burnout, almost went bankrupt, almost said, fuck it, it's not worth it. I don't care anymore. And I don't know, for some reason, it it worked. I don't know. I'm trying to think of a non-glamorous way to say it, but I reached a place in the second half of the year when it started to make sense, and I realized, oh, this was a lot I went through was, you would say, was like intended for evil, but it ended out being for good. And it took going through a lot of shit and trial and effort and hard work and very little sleep and all these kinds of things to get to that other side. but I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's not like, oh, it was all worth it. Yay. No, it was worth it, but there's no yay. It was just really hard and challenging, and it may not have turned out well, and we'd be having a different conversation now. So, that's why I don't sugarcoat
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, it's like it's like when sometimes I share stuff from my life, and then people go all like cheap philosophical and go like, yeah, but that shaped the person who you are today. And I'm like, yeah, to be honest, if I could avoid like at least 50% of what I had to go through, I would gladly avoid it. I might not be the same person today, but that would have saved me. Like I would have won some couple of years of life ahead of me.
Yeah.
But something I'm going to connect something you said with other things like I saw around, what I think are like interesting is, you said how you can react when a client becomes like, starts like having these behaviors, and you go to cut, like what I call cut the crap. It's like, you draw a line and you say like, you know what, like, yeah, sure, I'm at your service, but there's some like bare minimums that need to be respected, and respect is not one that we can trade. Um, and recently, I don't know if you saw the show Arcane on Netflix.
I have not seen it yet.
Okay, so it's
I've heard
all
great things.
3D, yeah, 3D hand drawn. It's just very, very good work.
Yeah, I've seen the trailer. It looks
And
incredible.
so Riot Games, which is like has the IP on the characters and the story and the lore, worked with a studio that's called Fortiche, which are France, sorry, and they've made an amazing work. And recently they kind of like revealed how much the production of the two season had cost. And I can't remember now if it was like Disney or I mean whoever from whatever big huge studio came in and said like, oh, that's a lot of money. It's like you like that's because you're so new in this industry. Like you've been misspending your money. Um, and the head of production like literally replied saying, that has nothing to do with what you're saying. It's just like we pay artists their fair share. It's like we pay talent what it needs to be paid. We're not like scamming the dollars to pay them as little as possible, because then work would have suffered. And so I appreciate you saying that, because even if, like you say, your reaction can be emotional, it comes from a good place. I also have an aversion towards injustice. It's something that again also like makes me very cranky. It's very,
That's a
very
good word.
cranky.
Yeah.
And connecting this with the wealth principle, I come from South America, and again, like very divergent social scales. I call it. I mean, I think you were right on the money when you said freedom, because the fact of like having wealth gives you the freedom to do things which are maybe not related to money then itself. But like you mentioned, seeing friends. I've saw people that couldn't see their friends because they couldn't afford it, or they had to walk like, I don't know, if it was like 15 kilometers to get to see somebody because they couldn't afford taking a bus. Of course, probably people listening to this podcast won't be in that situation, but I think it's something worth keeping in mind when we're talking about the underbelly. It's demystifying this part of our industry, is that it's important to have this conversation because that will give you freedom freedom to get, like you said, the station you needed to start your career, freedom to travel and meet people. That's something that came out at Camp Mograph, where we met, you and I, very briefly, because everybody was talking and like, yeah, you should go to events and you should do this and you should do that, and I think it was Shell from Australia, uh, that brought this in, and she said like, I don't think you guys realize how privileged we are. Like, you guys like are talking about like traveling here and going to Europe and go to this event and to this thing. It's like all that costs money. Like, there's people that like in other groups where I'm in conversations, there's people from other continents, South America, Asia, Africa, and some of those people look at all of this with a very different eye, and
Oh yeah.
they might be well way more focused on the underbelly because it's a survival thing. So, before it becomes a survival thing, let's have the conversation so you can harness it to your, to your benefit.
You're reminding me of an interesting mini story I can share that I had a client. So this is a studio owner from Rio de Janeiro. And I won't name him or his studio, but
It's okay.
he had gone through a class that I teach. And one of the things I teach is how to regain your confidence, how to raise your prices, how to break through and stand out, these sorts of things. And I think maybe this is 4 or 5 years have gone by. And he reaches out to me and he says, I'm going to be in New York. Let's meet in person for the first time. I said, fantastic. So we meet at this bar, and we're up on the 50th floor in Manhattan overlooking. And through the course of the evening, as I'm getting to know him, I hear him telling this story. And he was saying, for me to come to New York, he said, just the plane ticket and a few nights of hotel is, I can't remember the numbers, but it was something like, this is 3 months to 6 months of salary for the average person. And when I first mentioned, this is my friend, he said, when I first mentioned I'm going to go to New York to do business development, to take meetings, to try and win work from New York, they laughed at me. They said, that's insane. Why would you spend 3 to 6 months of money to go to New York City? That's ridiculous. Now, fortunately, his business had grown and they had won some business from the United States, so he could afford it. But you can imagine the investment, the risk that someone like that is taking. I think you're right. People, we just often forget. We have no way to compare or just to empathize with the different situations that people come from. Because what I realized speaking to him was, wow, this is your 3rd or 4th trip to New York. You come once or twice a year. And he said, yes, because it's working, right? Now I understand how to come here. I know how to meet brands and agencies and bring work back. And, but it was very sobering to realize 99.999% of creatives in Brazil don't have that opportunity. They don't know it's even possible. They don't even dream of it because it's foolish. So that was just a really eye-opening moment for me, realizing, wow, people come from very different places and perspectives, and also that there's so much to learn and gain by us connecting and sharing and helping each other. So
We are reaching the 1 hour mark, Joel. So it's a very interesting. No, it's a very interesting conversation. Do you still have some minutes to spare, or do you want to start
I
landing
do.
the plane? Okay, so let's
Let's
let's keep going a little bit
let's keep
more.
going. Yeah, I've got another 20 minutes.
Let's go for it.
Let's do it.
Um, so we've talked about the past. We've talked about the present. Now let's talk a little bit about the future.
Okay.
Um, so right now you're doing Forum. I know you're doing other ventures. Where do you think, because this is also something that came up when we were talking with PJ and also with Erin, is I know where I am today and I kind of like know where I want to be, but do I really want to be there? What does that imply? And so, um, and part of it was talking about scaling, the studios, but like for you, it's kind of like different. So where are you aiming at now for the future? Like, where do you see yourself ahead?
Mm. Well, I think it's been really exciting this year to see a community of founders come together so quickly, right? And this is this community called Forum. And of course, I want to see that continue to grow and evolve. I don't think I see it scaling, right? Like I have 100 core members that are highly engaged. And then there's another few hundred people that are sort of involved, but not fully engaged. Many people say, "Oh, do you want to grow that to thousands of people?" And right now, no, because there's something powerful about it being small and intimate and manageable, and there's a level of connection and help and support that is possible that I don't think is possible if it was to scale. But one thing when I think about the future that I do get very excited about is the idea of what can we do because we are a community. So this idea of if we had the world's 100 best studios or 500 business owners and 500 leaders or 5,000 of us come together, it's really interesting to ask, how could we, as a group of people in solidarity, make our industry better, stronger, right? Maybe more welcoming and inviting to the next generation, but also how might we even improve the world? I know that's a very lofty idea, but I think it's a really interesting
Miss,
question
Miss,
because
Miss Universe speech.
yeah, right. Exactly. It's like we're gonna cure world hunger or something. But I do think it's really interesting that I believe that the creatives of the world are more needed than ever before in today's world. Right? There's so much disinformation. There's so much people being pushed to the extremes. Right? There's partisanship and all these things. And I feel like the creatives are the ones who are going to keep reminding us of what is really true and really meaningful and what brings us together and right connects us. And that's what I think it's interesting to me to think of, is there some sort of group or gathering or community or association or something. And again, I have some things I'm working on that I can't say much about yet, but I just very much love this idea of if I'm one person and I'm out there and I'm speaking on social media, okay, that's interesting, right? Look at my buddy Chris Doe, right? He has such an incredible following and such a loud, a big voice in the world, and that's great. But I also think it's interesting, what could 1,000 voices that come together around a common cause, purpose, or mission do, especially if these are 1,000 businesses, then this is a lot of potential influence. Like, I think, for example, when I looked at the number of businesses that are plugged into my community, and let's say on average, a studio generates several $1,000,000 a year. Well, if there's several hundred people in that community, each running a business generating several $1,000,000, we're we're talking about like $500,000,000 worth of creative work being commissioned and running through these businesses every year. There's a lot of interesting things that might become possible just through that alone. So I know I'm being somewhat vague, but maybe this gives you a sense of where my curiosity is taking me next.
No, I can read through the lines. Um, and like when you say creatives are needed more than ever, I 100% agree, because and I have a very clear example, is when COVID happened. I think the only thing that kept us like sane was were creatives. Like, people trashed us all over the place and like, yeah, well, you're worthless pieces of shit. And in my head, I was like, dude, I mean, how did you stay sane through COVID? Watching a movie, reading a book, listening to music, uh, all of those things, which are
Yeah.
done by creatives.
Yeah.
And not only creatives, like, and all the people that orchestrate around it, because it's like, it's very beautiful to see these uh, kind of like hero artist, but in fact, it's like a whole team of people working around it. And and I think like the initiative that you were kind of like vaguely sharing with us now has something interesting, and I hope, this is my hope more as a solo freelancer, is that it will give visibility to artists or studios that didn't have it before. Because this is something I mentioned in one of the fireside chats during Camp MoGraph. And again, it was polarizing. Not everybody was happy with it. But I said, like during COVID, let's start from the beginning. Before COVID, for foreign artists or creatives to work with the US market was almost impossible. It was a closed market, and you had to be in the US for whatever reason. And COVID like blew those doors open, wide open, because filming wasn't possible anymore for a while. And there was such a demand of content and film and animations and stuff from the entire world. There were not enough artists or creatives or designers to output the demand. And so kind of like everybody had a job. But like, to me, to make a point, is like, suddenly, like, American companies started working with people outside of America. And not only it was getting people to do the job itself, but they also opened themselves to other types of creativities. It's like the there's people in Asia that have a style that you don't find here in Europe,
Yeah.
or you don't find in America, and vice versa. And so like all that transversal communication started happening, and it was incredible. And after like COVID ended, now those doors are like slowly kind of like closing again, and it's like becoming again this lonely island. And so I would love to be able to put a foot on the door and keep a crack open. And I'm not saying this specifically for myself, but like for other artists that are like incredibly talented, who have been said 100 times, and I've been said that 100 times, like, man, your work is amazing. It's like, okay, then so why do you hire me? And then there's like, then goes to whatever, you know.
Yeah.
And so I would like those people and those studios to be visible.
Oh, I agree so much. And I'll give you one example is Google. So right now, I know of several people inside Google and several production companies that work with Google that there's a common occurrence where inside of Google, they will say, oh my God, we need to get this huge project done. And we would love to work with this studio and that production company and that freelancer. And they reach out to these people and they say, how long will it take? And when can you start? And then the issue comes up. Well, it takes 6 months to get onboarded, to go through legal, compliance, procurement, right? Taxes, IT, security. And Google says, forget about it. We'll just go and work with the people we've always worked with. So in the States, right, for all how great the United States is in terms of big brands, big budgets, yay. There's this enormous amount of friction because America is also extremely litigious. And there's all these requirements and, right, as much as we say that we're all about freedom and, right, entrepreneurship and so forth, there's actually tremendous barriers and friction. And let's just say that one of the initiatives I'm working on, it's this thing called Studios United. I may have mentioned it in London. I don't recall. But it's the idea of how could we remove all the friction between people like Google and all of the small studios and production companies, right, and agencies out there. And I think we have it figured out. I think we have the solution, and it's something I'm working on. And let's just say that this is one of the things that I think could have an enormous impact and help many, many, many of these small companies that would otherwise not be considered. They would be passed over. They would be, right, ignored. Because, right, laundry can be in that conversation, right? And Swarovski can be in that conversation. But what about the little studio from Milan or from Buenos Aires? I mean, I think it's going to be very interesting. And again, I'm very optimistic, but like I said before, I'm a confessed radical optimist.
Yeah, and you know, like, why would you shut yourself off from such a pool of talent? Because I'm convinced that, you know, you pick the better man for the job. You know, so if you're looking, like you said, for a certain style and a different thing, maybe that the person that right now today, or the studio that's right now today, like killing with that style or has his own style that nobody else does, he's probably not in the US. He's, I don't know where he is.
Well,
Um,
it's either the reality of risk or it's the perceived risk that is the barrier. And I think once we understand that, we say, is there a way that we can eliminate that risk? And the answer is yes, absolutely. That's the job. That's the thing I'm figuring out and determined to figure out, because you're right. Once you remove that risk, of course you would hire that artist.
Before we depart ways, I'm gonna pull the rug on you and have like a little like white page for you to fill now.
Okay.
If you had to, like, I will let you close the conversation with a blank page, and so it's up to you to choose how do you want to close it, but it has to be related to what we've been talking about, the underbelly. You
So
can
now
take a
the white
couple.
page begins.
Yeah, so you can take a couple seconds. You don't have to, like, from the get-go shoot, but
No, I think I can I can go back to what's a recurring theme for me, especially this year, because every few weeks I do what I call an initiation, which is a moment when there's, say, 10 studio founders and we have a meeting and I'm welcoming them into this community. And what I tell them is, I'm very curious to know, what is it? So I'm putting this white page out to everyone listening. Okay, so I'm now speaking to you. I'm curious to know, what is it that you want? What is it that you really, really want? What is it that you deeply, deeply desire as a creative person, but even as a human being? Because if we don't express that want and that desire, then we don't know how to help each other. So I always ask people, tell me what you want, and then let's go make it together. Because the deeper purpose, the deeper magic that we are all looking for is, we know that, like we said earlier, the world now more than ever needs the creatives of the world to step up and to speak and to create and to paint and to sing and all these things. And what I know is, if we don't have a certain mastery of the game, okay, that we call business, we call it the ugly underbelly. But if we don't have an understanding of the rules of the game, we won't participate. We won't have a voice at the table. We won't contribute. We will be shut out of the game. So my cry, my anthem, right? My question is, when are we going to figure this out? When are we going to play this game? So let's ask each other, what is it that we want? And then let's learn this game that we call business to unleash this greatest gift within us. So that's my white page. Let's go. Let's go make this and create this future together.
Well, thank you, Joel, for the delightful conversation. Thank
You
you
are
for
so
being here.
welcome. It's been a great, really cool conversation. Thank you, Augustine.
I'm happy you enjoyed it, and I hope to talk to you very soon.